to know this new technology. So let's zoom out a bit, where we've come from. So a long time ago we were hunter-gatherers. Then 10,000 years ago we had the agricultural revolution. And at that point agriculture made up virtually 97% eventually of all the economy. Then 250 years ago we had the industrial revolution, and gradually manufacturing took a bigger and bigger chunk of the total economy. And then 60 years ago we had the first of the digital revolutions, the start of computers. And 25 years ago the internet, which started us to be able to communicate digitally instead of through traditional mechanical means. 8 years ago digital finance, and now about a year ago the first decentralized autonomous organization. So you can see there we've now covered 4 different kinds of digital production, of digital revolution.
A bit closer, please.
A bit closer, is this better?
Perfect.
We've got digital production, communication, finance, and law. And if any of you have seen my 4 pillars of a decentralized society, those are the 4 pillars where I mentioned decentralized production, decentralized communication, decentralized finance, and decentralized law. So with these 4 revolutions now in place, we are set for a rapidly advancing digital age. Already today, 47% of all corporate assets are intangible. Now, intangible is not exactly the same as digital, but it's an indicator for it. This is from last year's, a study done last year of all the corporates in the world. And if you don't just take the average, but if you look at the leading organizations today, they are dominantly digital. Intellectual capital is recognized as the most important assets of companies like Facebook, Google, Amazon, and so on. And then if we swing from the general economy to the financial economy, we can see a similar development. In the distant past, we had physical peer-to-peer. But physical peer-to-peer is very limited. You can only deal with people face-to-face, and it's slow and impractical. So gradually, in the past century, we started switching to a transition stage, which is this complicated clearing, switching, and settlement network that we've got all over the world, the legacy financial system. So that was a big step from physical face-to-face, but very inefficient, as we know. And because it's indirect, you need middlemen, and you need all the compliance around that, which is very expensive. And then recently, with the invention of Bitcoin and the whole suite of financial technologies, crypto financial technologies, we are moving back to peer-to-peer, but this time digital peer-to-peer. So highly efficient digital peer-to-peer that allows you to trade with anybody in the world. So looking at digital crypto finance technologies, here is the total market capitalization taken last night from the CoinMarketCap website. And it's very clear that's an exponential curve, but the amazing thing is, if you look there, May 16, that's a year ago, the market cap was only about $8 billion. And as of last night, it was 172 billion. So the vast majority of this has happened just in the last year. Now, some people might point at this as a bubble, but let's put it in context. Here are some global financial statistics that I've put together. And if you look at the top, Bitcoins make up just 0.1 trillion. In other words, 100 billion, roughly. And that is a tiny drop in the ocean compared to all the financial assets in the world. I mean, cash, all the cash in the world is about 5 trillion. Gold is about 8 trillion. And even that is just scratching the surface. If you look at all the stock markets put together, that's about 70 trillion. So that's all the world's companies that are listed on stock markets, all the value put together, about 70 trillion. And then, interestingly, financial assets in total, 223 trillion. But even that is dwarfed by derivatives, forex and derivatives contracts, 775 trillion, making up a total of $1 quadrillion, roughly, of financial assets in total. Now, what's interesting to observe there is if you look at the top part, cash, gold, stock markets, those are relatively concrete assets. And as you go further down, they become more abstract. So as you can see there, already today, the vast majority of the world's assets are abstract assets, like derivatives and so on. And okay, so that's the asset picture. If you look at the transactions picture, a similar picture emerges there. You look at the total Bitcoin payments, it's about roughly 1 billion per day, or about 365 billion per year. In other words, 0.4 trillion Bitcoin transactions, Bitcoin payments per year. And that is absolutely dwarfed by looking at all the payments. Now, when I refer to payments there, we are not including central bank payments and so on, only looking at normal types of payments. That's 672 trillion, so about 1,000 times more than Bitcoin payments. And if you add up all the financial transactions, it's about 10 quadrillion. So what's interesting here also, just as an aside, is the number of transactions tends to be about 10 times more than the amount of assets that those transactions are done with. So roughly every asset turns over 10 times per year. And again, here at the transactions at the bottom, the vast majority of those transactions are abstract, like derivatives transactions. So bottom line is we're rapidly moving into a future where almost all assets, over 99%, are digital. So what does this mean for us? Well, the first thing that we can observe is that economics always wins. Economics always wins. In other words, the most efficient, effective technologies always win. It doesn't matter what politics you have. It doesn't matter the pros and cons, how people resist it or not. Ultimately, the most efficient, effective technologies always win, right through history. In fact, technology is the big bear, and everything else, like politics and so on, runs on the back of the bear, is taking a ride along with that bear. Technology is the fundamental mover, from gunpowder to sailing ships to the printing press to the internet to Bitcoin and so on. But coming back to the future is all digital, how does this impact us? Well, the first thing to notice here is that wealth creation is the fundamental driver of individual and social well-being. Now, why would that be so? I mean, there's all these traditional cliches about, money is the root of all evil and so on. But if you look at the world more realistically, everything that most people want, things like good health care systems, good education, a nice clean environment, and so on, good security, et cetera, a peaceful world, all of these things depend on wealth. All the things that we want in the world are made easier by having wealth, because it costs money to have good education, to have good healthcare, to have a clean environment, and so on. The richest countries are the best on all those metrics, and the poorest countries are the worst on those metrics. Not because the people want different things. They basically want similar things. But in the poor countries, they don't have the money to do it. So if we want to help people, we need to look at how do we enable them to create more wealth. So with that in mind, let's look at the fundamental drivers of wealth creation. And of course, there's very complicated economic theories, but you can simplify it down to 3 factors. The first factor is you need security of property. I mean, wealth is basically property. So if you don't have security of property, you can't even start the process of wealth creation, because it'll be gone and stolen by somebody or destroyed by somebody. So security of property is number 1. The second factor is low transaction costs, because most of the things that we want are done through trade. The vast majority of wealth creation today is through trade. And if the transaction costs are high, it means that less trade happens. It's too expensive to do that transaction with somebody, to exchange with somebody. But with low transaction costs, there are far more transactions, and therefore more wealth creation. And the third factor, which is also very important, is that you need a large economic network. The larger the economic network that you're part of, the better your ability to have division of labor and specialization. And through that is enabled a greater productivity of labor. And then all of that put together allows you to create wealth and a higher standard of living. So let's look at where we are with those factors today, those three drivers. First of all, secure property rights. Now, the interesting thing is that the vast majority of the world, 2/3 of the world today, do not have access to secure property rights. This is hard to believe in a country like Switzerland, where for centuries we've had secure property rights. But 2/3 of the world do not have that. That's several billion people. In countries like India and Brazil and so on, there are people who don't even have property rights for where they're living. They don't have secure title. So this is something where crypto finance can help. There's now first initiatives to use blockchains, like in India, to register title. So crypto finance can play a fundamental role here, even for traditional physical assets, but even more so for the future of digital assets. And secondly, for efficient trade. Now, here's a very interesting study done a few years ago, published in the Journal of Institutional Economics in Cambridge. They found that if you reduce transaction costs across the whole economy by just 0.1%, you quadruple that economy's ability to create wealth. That's a phenomenal statistic that they've come up with. Now, it sounds impossibly good, but if you think about it, everything that happens in the economy, all the wealth creation, it's all different transactions. So if you add 0.1% to every transaction, it's 0.1% plus 0.1% plus 0.1% and so on, and eventually it's this huge drag on the economy. We'll see examples of this later. So this is something that we have to pay attention to, and in fact today we know from recent economics that transaction costs is the thing that we have to focus on. We have to lower transaction costs. And here again, crypto finance can play a massive role because it makes things so much more efficient than with legacy finance. Thirdly, the economic network size. Now, if you had some of the world's most creative geniuses, people like Steve Jobs and Albert Einstein and Mozart and so on, the world's top creative guys, but just 30 of them, include Elon Musk there as well. And you just isolate those 30 people in one place and they have no contact with the world, they would be desperately poor. They would be desperately poor. They'd have to spend most of their time just to survive, to get enough food to survive, because they'd have limited division of labor and specialization. So we are lucky today if we are integrated with the world economy, where we can have access to wealth creation ability that's impossible for people that are not connected to the world economy. So what does the picture look like there today? It's not that good. I mean, we are very lucky in Switzerland and the Western world, which, by the way, is just about 1 billion people. 1 billion out of the total 7 billion. We're very lucky because we're connected with the world, but the majority of people are not yet connected to the world economy. I mean, if you look at Asia, it's now a little bit better. This is a McKinsey study from a few years ago, but in the meantime, Asia is at about 65%, sorry, the other way around. Is about 50% that is not connected to the world economy. And South America, about 60%, is still not connected to the world economy. In Africa, it used to be about 80% in sub-Saharan Africa. It's now down to maybe 75%, is still disconnected from the world economy, which means these people are kept poor. They don't have the ability to increase their wealth because they are limited to face-to-face transactions. And here again, crypto finance can play a huge role. I mean, if we look at just one recent thing that's caught a lot of attention is ICOs. The ability for anybody, anywhere in the world, who's got access to a mobile phone and a Bitcoin wallet to participate in ICOs, whereas previously only rich people that were well connected could do that. So crypto finance plays a huge role in connecting people to the global economy. So in summary, crypto finance uses cryptographic algorithms to drive, like never before, the three main drivers of wealth creation: secure property rights, low transaction costs, and a large economic network, integration with the world economy. So as a result, crypto finance extends the division of labor and specialization, improves people's ability to create wealth, and will drive the greatest explosion of wealth creation we've ever seen. So just one thing that's quite interesting also, that is often missed by legacy finance, is this principle of the long tail. So the long tail is referring to, you see this red curve there, and this beginning part at the top, that's the short head, and then this part is the long tail. In other words, this is the long tail. Now, when you have a technology that's expensive, it means that, of course, it's only sustainable if you make a profit. So you have to add a profit margin on top of the cost. So here at the left-hand side, you can see that's the cost price of an expensive technology. And then you add some profit margin on top, so there's your selling price. So the difference between selling price and cost price multiplied by the number of customers that you have gives you your total profits. So that's the area there. So that's a relatively small profit, even at a high price. Now, what happens if you switch to a technology that's a lot cheaper? In other words, your cost price drops from up there down to at the bottom here. You still add your same profit margin on top. Well, now suddenly this technology becomes accessible to a lot more people. So you have a much bigger market. So paradoxically, even though you're dramatically dropping your selling price, because there's so many more people, here, this big area, that's your profits. So your profits go up exponentially, even though your selling price is dropping. And this is the fundamental thing that's behind the success of big companies today, the big giants like Amazon and Google and Facebook and so on. These are the big giants today, even though they charge virtually nothing, because they are accessing the entire globe. So in summary, what we are witnessing now is the democratization of finance. The financial center is at the epicenter of a fundamental revolution that is radically changing geopolitics. As I mentioned earlier, economics always wins. Politics is the consequence, not the driver. This digitization is enabling tremendous efficiency gains and universal financial inclusion, resulting in vastly greater wealth creation and ultimately the elimination of poverty. We've seen more people lifted out of poverty in the last 10 years and 20 years than ever before in history. Hundreds of millions of people. And this is accelerating. So I mentioned already ICOs. So this is one way that crypto finance is revolutionizing fundraising. So not just participating in the economy, but also participating in funding the next generation of technologies. So as you can see there, to participate in Uber's seed round a few years ago, you'd have to be very well connected, probably based in San Francisco and knowing Travis Kalanick through a mutual friend. But for the ICOs that we have today, all you need is your mobile phone and an internet connection. And you download the software and you can participate. And already now, there's many Bitcoin and crypto finance millionaires and even billionaires. Some of them right here in Zug. I'm not going to go into this into too much detail, but here are some of the differences between token sales and traditional fundraising. Token sales are open to everybody. They are highly liquid. They are fast and cheap to do compared to traditional IPOs, which are basically too expensive and too impractical for most people to do it. And based on community momentum, as opposed to revenue traction with traditional fundraising. So let's look at the crypto finance ecosystem in a little bit more detail. And I make a difference between two kind of fundamental categories, and they parallel a fundamental difference in society as well. In society, we are playing a game, the economic game, and also other games, but the game we're interested in here is the economic game. And to play that game, we need rules. We need good rules. It's like when you play a soccer game, a football game. If you don't have good, clear rules that most people agree on, it's chaos. So you need good, clear rules, but simple rules that are easy to understand and that are easy and fair. So that's the first big kind of category. And then once you have a social consensus, Whether it's a football game or the wider society, you need a consensus about what those rules are. Then you can play the game within those rules. So in the economy, the game is when I go to the supermarket and I buy some goods and services. But we need an understanding that we'll be honest, we don't cheat each other, we need to agree on the price and so on. So the rules of the game are established through social consensus, but then the game itself is played one-to-one in various one-to-one trades, which are contracts. So you have the contract category, the consensus category to establish the rules, and then you have contracts to actually play the game. So how does this parallel the crypto finance ecosystem? Well, first you have consensus systems, the blockchains being the most famous ones, but there's others like Ripple and so on as well. Now, these are very good for establishing community standards and infrastructure. They're essential for that. So this is a very important technology for that. But they are not very efficient. As we know, the scaling debate has taken on increasing importance within the blockchain space the last number of years. And then you have deterministic contract systems, which are very efficient for one-to-one trades. So I mentioned my company Monetas, but there's also the blockchain-related but off-chain contract systems, like the Bitcoin Lightning Network, and for Ethereum there's the Raiden network, that are also off-chain systems. So they fall also in this category down here for efficient person-to-person trading. So the bottom line is these contract and consensus technologies are complementary and synergistic. We need both of them. Just like you need the blockchain and then you need Lightning for the complete solution. So how this plays out is that the consensus technologies, the blockchains, are very good for storing assets. So they're a good asset layer. And then you need a highly efficient transaction layer in the contract systems. And then together you've got the whole world, the best of both worlds. Now, looking at the evolution of blockchains, we started off with Bitcoin a few years ago, which solved decentralized consensus through the proof of work algorithm. And then we had many copies of that, but basically the same thing. No fundamental innovation. And of course, I'm oversimplifying here. There's important innovations, but the big picture, the next big generation was Ethereum, which added smart contracts. Now, Bitcoin already has simple smart contracts, but not really usable in a practical way on a big scale. Ethereum really went a big step further there. And then more recently now, Tezos isn't officially launched yet, but it adds some additional characteristics, which is why I class it as a third generation blockchain. It adds decentralized governance, which is very important to resolve the issues that we've had in the past with different parties pulling in different directions and then resulting in vicious disputes and forks in the blockchain and so on, and which fragments the ecosystem. And to avoid that, we need a decentralized governance mechanism. It also adds proof of stake, which is more efficient algorithm and a very strong security focus. So if you look at the on-chain and off-chain technologies, there's and I pointed out earlier, the off-chain technologies are what you need for efficient transactions. And it's a huge difference. It's a world of difference. Initially, a few years ago, people thought that you could just make the blockchains gradually more efficient. But that has been given up. It's just not the right technology for it. It's much better to just go off-chain and develop solutions there and then combine it with the chain. So here, for example, just looking at 3 metrics, the speed on, let's use Bitcoin as an example, 10 minutes to 18 hours. And sometimes now with the clogging up, it's even longer than that. Whereas in a contract system like Monetas and some of the networks like Lightning and Raiden, you can get down to sub-seconds. So about 1,000 times faster. And on the cost, it's an even bigger difference. If you look at the total cost of a Bitcoin transaction, in other words, not just the transaction fee, which by itself has been rising, but the total cost, in other words, the mining cost as well, which is the full cost of the system, then it's about $10 per transaction, just very roughly. And that's, of course, fluctuating, but that gives you an idea. Whereas in contract systems like Monetas and the off-chain systems of Raiden and Lightning, you can get down to 1/1000th of a cent per transaction and about 1,000,000 times more efficient. And the same thing with scalability. As we know, the famous statistic, Bitcoin can do about 7 transactions per second. Visa does an average of about 3,000 per second and can do up to 56,000 per second. But what we really need are systems that can do millions per second if you want to run the entire world's transactions. So contract systems can do that. So what is it that is responsible for these fundamental differences in these technologies? Well, if we zoom out a little bit, all transaction systems, everything from thousands of years ago until the present day, Bitcoin and everything, have the same fundamental architecture. But I'm saying at a very high level. Once you go into the details, they're very different. But fundamentally what happens is you've got the transaction parties, the sender and the receiver, and so they want to do a transaction, but of course, as we know, it's good if you trust each other, but sometimes people cheat. So you need some mechanism to ensure that the people don't cheat each other. So this is a third party, which doesn't have to be a human being, but some third party that serves a notary function that observes the transaction in some way and ensures the integrity of the transaction. So that's what I call the notary here, that observes that transaction. So all transaction systems are like this. In the case of Bitcoin, the Bitcoin network is the notary. And then the transaction parties use this to do their transactions. And thousands of years ago, it was a human being. Now you've got professional notaries. But Bitcoin and new technologies mean that we can automate this and make it digital. So digital notaries. So the way that these different systems differ is in the architecture of the notary. So this is where the attention has to be. How do you architect the notary? And basically, there's about 3 major categories of how you can do that. Here's a centralized monopoly, which of course we don't like. It's liable to abuse of power and catastrophic failure if something goes wrong. But it's sort of semi-efficient. It could be very efficient, but the problem is it has no competition, so there's no incentive to be efficient. Whereas here on the right-hand side, you've got distributed consensus, peer-to-peer. So this would be the Bitcoin network. So there's no structure really here. And this is in the abstract, of course. We know that structure has emerged among Bitcoin miners. But theoretically, it's this completely sort of random open network of notaries, all the different participants, all the miners that have to agree with each other to do a transaction. And then here at the bottom, you've got the users that use this network. The problem is this, because it has no structure, is very inefficient. If you have to, when you want to go buy an apple at the supermarket, you first have to get millions of people all over the world, millions of computers, to first agree and come to a consensus on that transaction. That's obviously very inefficient. That will never be efficient. It doesn't matter what computers we have, quantum computers, what further improvements in the Bitcoin algorithms and so on. It will never be able to compete with systems that are direct peer-to-peer without involving all those notaries. So, and what we've already seen in the Bitcoin mining network is that you get these big clusters that start to make things a little bit more efficient, but it's not really fundamentally solving the problem. And this here in the middle, by the way, which I call federated co-opetition. So co-opetition being both competition and cooperation. This is the structure that you see right through nature. Right through nature. And that's how the internet works. That's also how the Swiss political system works. This federated co-opetition is the most efficient way to do things. It has the advantages of efficiency, but also some measure of decentralization. That you've got a number of different notaries, but to do a particular transaction, you only need one notary. Just like your internet service provider. You don't need to join all the world's thousands of internet service providers. You just need to join one. And then that one is connected to the other ones. So this is also, by the way, how Lightning and Raiden and so on are designed, more or less, in a simplistic way. So then when you take all these technologies and you combine them, how do you get them to people? Today we are very lucky. For the first time in history, we've got a global distribution platform, the mobile phone. So now we can take these advanced crypto finance technologies and we can get them to everybody in the world, because virtually everybody now has a mobile phone. So people like this that previously were cut off from the world economy and stayed poor now have access to the most advanced technologies. They're connected to the world economy and they are now no longer limited in their ability to create wealth. They can access all the world's knowledge, they can do business with anybody. And with translation technologies like Google and so on, they don't even need to speak the same language. They can do business with somebody in China. So how fast is this coming? Well, Ray Kurzweil found this very interesting thing that goes back through history. And he calls it the law of accelerating returns. And when we look at different technologies, each individual technology, look at the top left there, forms this S-curve. At the bottom, it's relatively flat because there's only a few kind of religious early adopters, like what we also had with Bitcoin, the few kind of true believers in the beginning. But most other people just think, oh, it's a fad. Like, if you want to know that the technology has a good future, just look what Paul Krugman says. If Paul Krugman says it's going to fail and it'll be a fad, then you know this is going to be a success. Paul Krugman predicted that the internet was a fad. This was in the mid-90s. And of course, now the last few years he said Bitcoin's a fad. Well, that's very good. Okay, so then gradually it starts taking off, it becomes mainstream, and then you have this huge exponential acceleration up. But eventually it saturates the market and it flattens off, and then it becomes the previous legacy technology until the next technology generation takes off. So what you see is you have this succession of S-curves that get ever steeper. And if you draw a line through all of them, you see this double exponential acceleration. So what does this mean? Well, if you take the rate of progress in the year 2000 and you extrapolate that backwards through the 20th century, you could have done the entire 20th century of progress in 25 years at the rate of the year 2000. But it gets even better. If you take the year 2000's rate of progress and you look with this accelerating curve that we're on, how much progress we're going to see in the next century. In the next 100 years, we're going to see as much progress as 20,000 years at the rate of the year 2000. It's hard to get your mind around. So just let's look at a few things. I mean, in the past, it used to take forever for companies to get big. Now, Facebook started in 2004 and went over 100 billion in 7 years. The iPhone, it's hard to believe that it only launched in 2007, 10 years ago. And within 5 years, it completely transformed how we all operate. All of us, including people in poor countries. Crypto finance services that are launching this year are going to completely change finance in the next 5 years. Now, when I say that to central banks and others, they just think, oh, geez, this guy, what drugs is he on? We're going to be here forever and so on, but okay, we'll see. So the financial industry is facing a Swatch or Nokia moment. Swatch, for those of you who are not that old, in the 1970s, the Japanese digital watch industry came on and threatened the Swiss watch industry. And then the Swiss were quite inventive. They came up with the Swatch idea and they saved the traditional watch industry. So that was a good outcome. Now Nokia was the dominant player in the market, and within about 3 years they were virtually gone. Within 3 years. I mean, that's just amazing. So the financial industry is facing this. And those that move fast and see the opportunity are going to survive and prosper. And many are not. So let's look at the future of cash, because cash too is moving from physical to digital. And this is an important point of terminology. People talk about cash is dead and we're moving into a cashless future. Nonsense. Cash is always going to be here. Cash is an essential way for how the economy works. There's fundamental economic reasons why we will always have cash. The only thing that's changing is it's moving from physical to digital. That's it. So we're moving from physical cash to digital cash. Now, so when we look at the cost of physical cash, in other words, legacy, old-fashioned cash, it is a huge drag on the economy. We looked earlier at transaction costs. Well, physical cash has huge transaction costs, and it adds up. For developed countries, it's about 1% to 2% of GDP. That's massive. I mean, Switzerland is happy if it gets like almost 1% of economic growth. So if Switzerland switched totally to digital cash, it could dramatically boost the Swiss economy. Now, in developing countries, it's even worse. It's 5% to 7% of GDP. That was a study done by the Reserve Bank of India. And in some countries, like in South Africa, the central bank told me they think it's higher than that. Now, the Bank of England also did a study. They found that switching to these new technologies, crypto-based central bank money, they would add about 3% to GDP, steady state GDP, 3% in a developed economy. This is massive. So with these statistics, it's not surprising that central banks are gradually are taking this seriously. We're a little bit short on time, so I'm not going to go into details here, but digital cash is a different world compared to physical cash. It's not just cheaper and faster and more secure, but the most important thing is you can do transactions with anybody in the world. A guy in the middle of Africa can do business with somebody in China. So that makes them part of that global economy. And you can build advanced financial services with digital cash. Whereas physical cash, you're limited to simple payments. We'll see the financial services pyramid in a moment. So the future of financial services is that financial services providers are going to still be there. So this thing that banks are going to disappear and so on, I think is exaggerated. But they will change. There'll be new kinds of banks, like we're already seeing with Fedor and other similar outfits. But they will offer financial services that are based on digital tokens and that are held by users in true digital wallets. So there'll be more user control. So here's the financial services pyramid. And payments are just the bottom layer of the financial services pyramid. So this is what gets all the attention, because that's kind of your foot in the door. But in terms of value, most of the value is as you go up the pyramid to the top. And financial institutions know this. In fact, most financial institutions these days in the West are making a loss on the payment layer. Like if they could outsource that, they'd be happy because it would take costs off their books. So Bitcoin and these things, if they were to take over, if crypto finance technologies take over the transaction layer, that's not a problem for financial institutions, provided they can keep the customer. So if they bring this on the back end, and they can keep the customer, they'd be happy, because then they need the customer to build all the financial services on top, insurance, credit, savings, and so on. So the other interesting thing to notice here is that all of these things here are different kinds of contracts. Savings instruments, investment products, credit instruments, these are all just different kinds of contracts. So what financial institutions are, fundamentally, is organizations that create and manage various types of contracts. And with these new crypto finance technologies and smart contracting platforms, it means we essentially now have a bank in a box. We can do everything that financial institutions are doing with software. So how do financial institutions make money? Well, they've been traditionally 4 ways. And in the future, surprise, surprise, we're still going to have those same 4 ways. Firstly, they can make money through loaning and earning interest on it. Or they can trade, like proprietary trading and so on, and make money off that. Or they can offer advisory services and make money off that. Or they can issue various types of financial instruments. Now, the most obvious one there is a central bank that issues fiat currency and earns seigniorage on it. But a frequent flyer mile is also a financial instrument. And the airlines that use it earn revenue from that issuance. And the same for any kind of loyalty scheme like Migros and Coop, where you earn loyalty points. Or community currencies that are issued by small communities. And there's now thousands of these all over the world. So those are different kinds of issuance. And all of these will continue in the future. It's just the technology that they use to do it with will change. So this presents a great opportunity for the financial industry. It's a threat and an opportunity for those who move fast. Those who move fast will continue in the future to be a trusted financial partner. Now, I know this might be sacrilege to the kind of hardcore crypto finance people among us, but most people are scared of managing their own digital wallet. They're like, I don't trust myself not to lose this. And I've got friends who've lost a lot of money in Bitcoin. And these are not stupid people. These are very, very bright people that know about security and so on. And they had their phone hacked, or they forgot the password, or they accidentally wanted to copy the password. And it was in the copy-paste process, the original one was deleted. And the stories are endless. So if the best and brightest cannot manage it, how are normal people supposed to do it? So in other words, there will still be a role for trusted entities that store your keys in the future. Just like we have bank safe deposit boxes today. They will not have your wallet, which is a very important difference. They will not have your money, but they'll have the keys to it. But it'll be like a legal power of attorney, where you give them your keys and they are under contract. So if you lose them, you can go back and get a backup. So they will continue. Those that adopt these technologies can continue to be a trusted financial partner, and they can also continue to offer integrated financial services. With all the thousands of different startups, the millions of different startups, the normal consumer doesn't have the ability to keep track of everything that's developing. So the function of the big financial institutions is to make it easier, to build a brand, a strong, trusted brand, and then that they integrate all these technologies and make it very user-friendly. So if you buy an Apple computer, you know everything just works. So the future that we're moving into is a future where increasingly the technology is providing the trust, which is why I refer to it as the technology of trust, which is fundamentally transforming our world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Johann. So, very, very pleased to warmly welcome you all to the first Blockchain for Asset Management conference here in Crypto Valley. It's really great to see so many of you sitting here.